Hey there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to another episode of The Cult of You. Today's episode, I would like to discuss the subject of what I call hybrid gods. You see, there's this philosophy that is very common inside of spiritualism, occultism, the left hand path, and even aspects of the magical right hand path, if we can call it that, and is the notion that we are gods. And this is supported even in biblical texts where it says in Psalm 82, "Ye are all gods, and ye are the children of the Most High." This is a subject that I think many get confused with. Today, I'd like to unbox this, so to speak, as an idea, and I would like to also give you a healthy pathway by which you can explore this concept in a way that is functional, measurable, and that actually leads to results regardless of where you are. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode, and remember to live deliciously. Okay, so firstly, before I kind of get into today's episode, I wanted to just take a moment to give you a couple of quick announcements. One, as you've noticed, I'm changing up the order of how I share this. I'm taking out some of the extra stuff that was there before, try to shorten the episodes, and I'm doing a lot of this because of feedback that I'm getting from you. So I would honestly appreciate your feedback if you have ideas, things that you think can improve the format, the discussion points, people for interviews. You can mail upon the mail addresses. You can just click the link that's in the bottom of it. There's one link now that just leads to everything, a Linktree link. And you can pop me an email there, or you can just leave a comment down inside of each of these videos. I'm pretty responsive to try and get and react to any video or any comment or feedback that I do get. And my objective is to constantly grow and just improve not only this channel, but myself as a teacher inside of this format. Now, I've already gotten a bit of feedback from you in terms of what we did with the episode of The Astrologer, and we're going to be implementing that feedback. So as we explore different segments, and if there's segments that you'd like us to see incorporate, please do share that, and I'd love your ideas and your concepts. That being said, let's get into the kind of meat and bones of today's subject. So the reason this one's an important one for me is also because I find it's a bit of a follow-up to our previous discussion. In our previous session, that I called the missing elements in magic, I discussed the archetypes in Jungian psychology and how that corresponded to the four elements as an entry point. I also was very clear and I emphasized that I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all, but I am saying that that is very much the missing component, and utilizing things like active imagination in order to begin that relationship with these internal archetypes within the unconscious. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight in terms of that is a very interesting correlatory. You see, the concept of the king, warrior, magician, lover was popularized by Robert Moore, specifically in a book by the same name that then became popularized in the men's movement. But fundamentally, as I've emphasized, these are universal principles that are effective for male and female. One of the things that was not very much spoken there is how this philosophy is utilized very much in, analytical principles. The notion that was very popularized by Freud is the notion of libido, and I emphasize a lot, especially in my discussions around sex magic, and if you're a member of my course, you're very familiar with my relationship that I share between concepts like the libido, the Tao, the tetragrammaton, the concepts of the slave god, and these archetypes, or these fundamental precursors to our experience within our energetic bodies and our subconscious or unconscious dimensions of the self, the component or the facet of ourself that is always looking for unity or expression in and of itself. Now, one of the factors from the last discussion is that these manifestations can occur at different places in our experience. A person may be very well developed in the one and not as well developed. In other words, their libido is more influenced or more centered around that aspect. Their energy, their hara, their focus, their vril, if you will, is more cultivated in that one expression so to speak. And one of the principles of magical thought is that we're supposed to progress and develop all of these archetypes within ourselves in order to become, as we would say, whole in such. I remember when I was very, very young, in classic spiritualism, somebody posed the question, and it was in a spiritualist session, and they said, how can you say that you are God? And this is a statement that gets a lot of flack in the occult and spiritual communities, and rightfully so, because oftentimes the people that are claiming it have very little ground to demonstrate it from as well, which adds to the conflict, which adds to the drama and the confusion inside of it. Now, this is important to realize why. You see, the reason for it is people take this at an ego-based level. I am God. In other words, everything is my rule. Everything is my possible. I'm in charge of everything. Yet they are operating very often from a position of narcissism. And what I mean by narcissism, I mean by what they're saying at a conscious level and what they're saying at an unconscious level aren't aligned. In essence, this is very much depicted again in the magical initiation through the journey of Maat. When, as mentioned before, as the soul or the heart or the which represents the soul in that component is then weighed against the feather of Maat. In other words, we're weighed against congruency within ourselves. Is the way you're acting, the way you're behaving, your unconscious tell, so to speak, in alignment with what you are consciously communicating? You see, is your conscious and your unconscious mind aligned? Are you harmonious? You see, this is again why the need for therapy, why the need for shadow work, because you want to find those incongruent components of yourself in order to heal it. So as the question was posed, how can you say that you are God? I had to intervene and I had to kind of clarify that, and I want to emphasize that clarification here. The statement is not that individuals are themselves God or goddess or whatever you want to refer to as the Tao in this context. The statement is that each and every one of us and everything in life contains the Tao, holds the spark that is the divine. In other words, each and every one of us is, quote unquote, as the Bible even says, made in the image and likeness of God. Whatever your interpretation of that is, and it can get quite esoteric, but we're not going to explore that today. In essence, the concept is that each and every one of us has potential for divinity within ourselves. This, however, is also part of the problem. It is this part that affects our perceptions of grandiosity. It affects part of the unhealthy aspects of our relationships. We try to elevate some of our relationships to the divinest of standards based upon this perception. Our partner is the goddess, and we confuse our partner for the goddess or God within our inner opposites of that same nature, causing even more conflicts because we forget that we are gods, yes, with anuses, as the term goes. In other words, we are God, we have the God spark within us, there is a divine aspect to us, but we still shit and fart and eat and make mistakes and are in error. And we aren't really very quickly going to get to a place of resolution. In fact, there are many debates about the members of our society historically that have attained those roles or have claimed to attain those roles. In many aspects, many people are very disappointed in those same, archetypes when we see them in different lights. And part of the reason for this problem is that we begin to project these archetypes that exist within ourselves onto others. One of the typical failings often is you'll have this group of dedicated people that follow a guru of some sorts. And then years later, after the guru has passed or failed or his mortality, so to speak, is revealed, now suddenly they're suing the guru and they're saying how bad things were and everything like that. Now, I'm not saying there's not credence to that. There is, in many cases, a lot of credence to it. But why a lot of this phenomena happens is because people project onto the guru or the teacher all their archetypes, imagining that this individual has somehow merged or resolved all the archetypes. And that's not always the case. Sometimes that individual has maybe developed a handful or a few of them to a decent level. And the problem now occurs is when these individuals stop taking responsibility for cultivating that dimension within themselves and project it onto the other. And we see this in many aspects of the occult and spiritual communities because the thing that we are projecting on is sometimes not even just that guru. It could be a system, a way of life, or something like that. However, it is always a problem when it's something that can be taken away from us. It's the same way as when you're entering a relationship and you're saying, I'm happy because this person's in my life. I'm so blessed because that person's in my life. You're creating a rule set inside your unconscious. You're an instruction to your mind that makes the other individual the variable. And that variable is changeable, it is mutable, it can alter. As such, every time it alters, it causes you to re-question, re-struggle, research. How oftentimes have you been in a beautiful relationship that everything was great and wonderful and happy, and then when it was over, it was almost like, boom, you're back to the start of it. This is all, you may ask, what does this have to do with the concept of, your God? Everything, really. You see, for us to get to the fundamental spark of ourselves that is the divine, and let me be clear, I'm not stating that I have that. I am, as you, a seeker on that path, constantly working to unfold that dimension and get into relationship with it. But I also recognize it's not the only dimension of my being. It is a dimension of my being. And I'm trying to cultivate all dimensions of my being in order to be an original hybrid, an original creation, my own manifestation of my own will. It is important to recognize that as we begin our journey, though, with the divine within us, that entire hierarchy that falls outside of the divine that we've seen is described so eloquently in correspondence systems, from the zodiac to the planets to the elements. These are tiers of manifestation, or filters, or sides of the diamond, so to speak, through which that light gets reflected. And we often at different stages see or capture ourselves only at certain portions of it. This makes sense. Again, the neocortex can only process 2,000 bits of information as opposed to the cerebellum that calculates 400 billion bits of information. In other words, all these processes are still going on within yourself. You may only be conscious of a handful of these processes. Now, the path of magic is not a get-rich-quick scheme as it's oftentimes sold out. I live in South Africa, and you struggle to go many places without getting some little flyer of some moody doctor that can make penis bigger, help restore lost love life, make you wealthy. It's funny how these people are selling these secrets to make you super wealthy, and they themselves live in such shit situations, and they can't afford a proper website or decent e-commerce or anything that's quite basic for any one of us in business. Which again is why we should question the merit of these snake oil salesmen. I'm not saying all of them are. As I mentioned in the past, you can develop certain skills without developing. You can be a great martial artist and still be an idiot. You can be a warrior. And that's the one that we want to look at. The people that we want to take instruction from are the ones that are further along the path where we want to get to. That's what matters. What's the sustainability of their experience? So when we say that you have the divine within you, we recognize the divine was within you, but we're saying that just doing a certain ritual to unlock it is not the key. Doing the ritual, doing the technique is the same as when we're working off in therapy. When Robert Morris said the way to work with the archetypes was through active imagination, he was correct. As we understand, Kabbalistically speaking, imagination is what we find in correlation to Tiferet. It is the doorway between the subconscious and the unconscious. Or the subconscious, or the unconscious and the conscious. My apologies. What that means is that it is through going inward, through developing this inner relationship within our own self, that communication channel, that we get to come in touch with these archetypes. Now, the important thing to recognize is something we see in this as well as in the yogic systems. There's this view, this belief about if the Kundalini wakes up in an unhealthy state, the result, and it goes into either the Inga and Pingala channel, but it doesn't go up into both, through the Shishama, then what occurs is either madness or spontaneous combustion. In other words, this unbalanced force of energy either overexerts inwardly or overexerts externally, and either way the results are catastrophe. In the psychological aspect, we see the exact same thing at a slightly different or less extreme level, in that slowly getting the archetypes developed inside of ourselves, but not really having the development, oftentimes leads to depression. And a lot of people that suffer, I'm not saying this is all of them, but in many cases, much of the depression, the general nostalgia of life, is the result of having these archetypes there but not truly developed. We don't truly have a relationship with them. And this often occurs when you're in a system of thinking that disconnects you from these aspects of yourself. So you're unable to express them, you're unable to live with them. And this is oftentimes why certain forms of therapy, when they're a little bit more liberating, like sexual practices and tantra and things like that, are so healing for people, because getting in touch with the erotic unconscious alone is very cathartic. It starts to be a way to get in touch with those forces. On the other hand, you get the other extreme. You get those that spend too much time in the archetypal, and the archetypal mind, the unconscious, isn't always actually the friendliest place. In fact, a lot of true left-hand path practitioners have an entire map of the demonic, of the dragon, of all these deeper fundamental forces within the unconscious and deeper collective unconscious that shows the dangers of the landscape. It is because of that that it is so essential to do the work the right way. You're not going to step into the gym and suddenly pick up weights that are far beyond your means. You're going to crush yourself and cause injury. And that's what happens. And you see a lot of those on the other extreme. They overpush areas and they overactivate or over-energize the archetype and become possessed by it. Now, if that individual becomes possessed by the archetype, they don't have the archetype doesn't have consideration, for their mortality. We see this so much in the myths and the legends of the gods that don't care about the mortals. It doesn't care about your life, the fact that you have to pay bulls, your responsibility to your society. It just takes what it wants because its nature is far greater and more repelling than that of the mortal. Now, in the unhealthy ego, this becomes a really big issue, and it's one that must be resolved at a very clear level. The ego is also that thing that gets a lot of flack in spirituality, and it's really, again, due to poor education. The Eastern philosophy, as I've mentioned before, was not about ego being bad. It was about narcissism, which I've already explored, being bad. In fact, ego was necessary, the same as the magician or the witch understands the need for a protective circle. This protective circle is really just that, a healthy, well-established ego that is able to function as the middle world between the upper and lower planes. This is the realm we live. It's the place where we can operate, so we can go into counsel with our archetypes, we understand. But what is important is that the magician then recognizes, if I have a problem in the world, it's not very rarely, and I do say very rarely, I don't want you to get into the mindset that it's always. If we just swap the word always for mostly or occasionally, then it's a bit more functional. You see, if instead we recognize that the problems and the dramas that I have in my world are actually reflections of my relationship with that archetypal dimension within myself, now suddenly I begin to actually step upon the path of the Magi. The path of the Magus here, in essence, is the one where I go within or I go without, as one of my old spiritual teachers used to love to say. It's quite a simple idea, really, but its application can take a lifetime. Tools or systems like the magical systems are ways to engage the active imagination and the sensory and hypnotic principles in order to deepen that relationship. And if you're going to be doing those things on your own, it's important that you also study some form of therapy. Now, you don't have to become a psychologist or a psychoanalyst for that. You can pick up the work of Joseph Campbell, the work of Robert Moore. You can go through courses like mine, and there are many others. In fact, if you're on my Facebook group, I'm always sharing other resources to other teachers and other ones that explore these different concepts at more levels. The idea of the shadow work is essential because here's why. If the divine dimension of yourself is very well stated in the biblical context and in every other religion. Then one of my favorite statements, and the one that I struggled the most with to understand, was the statement, "Ye shall have no other God before me." I always thought, what a insecure bleep, you know what I mean? How petty must this deity be that has to tell you? I mean, if a man says that to his wife, like, "You're never gonna see any other man," it's probably the thing that's gonna end up making her see another man. It's that insecurity is not the thing that we seek from deity, and the problem is the interpretation of it as that as well. If we understand it correctly, it's actually a powerful spiritual instruction that is apt for those on the left, right, and every single path. "You shall have no other God before me" simply recognizes that all the gods, all the goddesses, all the archetypes contain within them a quintessential component that is the body of the ultimate God, or the ultimate God self, or deity, or Godhead. So what that means is, if we look at the discussion from last session, earth, air, fire, and water, and the archetypes that I discussed or explored around them, when they are in their mature, they have activated that light, that quintessential aspect of them that can then harmonize with the other. You see, once I understand what the need is that my fire or my warrior is trying to meet, and the need that my king is trying to meet, and the need that my magus is trying to meet, I get down to the essence. Now suddenly I give birth to the realization of what my life is actually about, what my true essence and true purpose is. This is where I enter the realm of spirit, because spirit, the fifth element, is the intercorrelation between them. And we see the same definitions in the Christ translations, because as we get the Tetragrammaton, the God of the Old Testament, Yod, He, Vav, He, we have the addition in Yeshua, the fifth letter, the Pentagrammaton, as the introduction of the Hebrew letter Shin, translating as the form, purifying and formless fire. Meaning, each and every one of us has the archetypes within us. The difference between a character such as Yeshua and any other adept or master is one who has purified these. And any other, as composed to all the, wild magicians and crazy ones out there that have momentary luck. You see, momentary luck or momentary magic is oftentimes the case of an individual that has maybe cultivated to an extreme one of the archetypes. In other words, that individual is possessed by the archetypes. These individuals will oftentimes formulate entire religions based around that one archetype, that one entity and forces like them. And it may be useful for you to explore those for a certain period of time, but if that's the only place you stay, you're literally letting the other parts of you die, and that's why you're unfulfilled. And then, the negative spiral starts to occur. You start chasing, this pattern of addiction starts to happen, and again, dis-ease sits in, the dis-ease of that flow of the libido, the dis-ease of the flow of the Tao. For us to restore it oftentimes means going completely away, and that's what occurs for especially people that aren't balanced in their development. They're not growing in the other areas and really bringing about that integral whole. And as such, they seek it in relationships or in places because they're looking for an intimacy that is lacking fundamentally within themselves. This was the purpose of religion. Religion, relegare, to reconnect. It was the essence of those stories and those symbolisms as ways for us to deal with the archetypes in terms of the mythologies, so that we would have ritual elders to help us restore this inner sense of meaning and relationship, and establish healthy relationships with the archetypes inside of us, teaching us to cultivate them one by one, to understand the essence behind that archetype. And once we understand the essence behind those archetypes, we can see finally the spirit or God or fundamental quintessential collective unconscious principle behind that. And this is the raising up of consciousness. This is the pathway of priesthood. You see, because as we progress through those four elemental dimensions, we enter into the planetary dimensions. This has always been the historical follow-up. And the planetary dimensions were always commonly associated to the 7 planets from which we get our 7 days of the week. These have always perfectly corresponded to the 7 chakras. Again, these same things keep reoccurring as patterns universally over and over across cultures and traditions and systems of thought. That is because they are part of our psychic makeup, not just mine as an occultist, but a Christian's, a Buddhist's, an atheist. Everyone, every human being has these things. Our expression of them, our language, the symbolism, that we put upon them would be relevant to our upbringing and our neural associations. In other words, our own individual trees of life and where that may be. But they're the same. For us then to debate with each other whether their pattern's right or mine's wrong recognizes that we are ourselves possessed or ruled by the gods, quote unquote, instead of us becoming the rulers of our own kingdom, which again Kabbalistically is the raising of Malkuth to restore back into Da'at, so the supernals are established by which we rule over the tree beneath us. And we see this very poetically again, reflective of that. When the 10th Sephir of Malkuth, which is my current reality, my current kingdom, also my ego, restored up to Da'at, which is very aligned to the part that's missing, my true essential, quintessential self that is resolved and no longer the subject of these dualities, but in essence was restored between Keter, Chochmah, and Bina. In other words, the God the Father and God the Mother, which is Chochmah, wisdom, consciousness, Bina, the progenitor of the energy matrix. You see, these then become the quintessential selves from which we archetypally produce our perceptions of mother and father, or the overemphasis that we misproject onto mom and dad, forgetting that they were just human beings, that we then also made the mistake of projecting too many archetypes onto them. And where do you do that? Where do you make someone else responsible for your archetype? Maybe, John's always the one to go fight the situation. We should call John. Amy is always the one to come up with the creative ideas. We should call Amy. This is useful in a company context. It really is. It helps for optimization, but it is not the path of the magus. The path of the magician, the path of spiritual freedom and liberation, means that we cultivate that. And it doesn't mean you become a specialist in each of these fields, but you develop those essences, those dimensions of yourself to such an extent that you are able to get in touch with the dimensions behind it. Once you do, the beauty of magic occurs. This is when you free yourself from the cage, from the box, from the way of normal thinking, because you're no longer seeking the approval of others, because there's no longer anything in it for you. This brings about a death. This death that you experience can be mournful. There's a period of longing, missing the old world, missing the familiar. And we describe this so beautifully in the formula that connects to the elemental process, the Iau formula. The sign of Osiris slain, the sign of the morning of Isis, the sign of Aphos and Typhon, and the sign of Osiris risen. This death transformation process describes literally what is happening to us at a cellular and psychological level, from where we give up the addiction of usually meeting the needs or the expression of that archetypal energy inside of the external or the world, the people, places, time, things, and events, as Joe Dispenza speaks about, to reconstructing the rules where I become that which I seek. I become the warrior, I become the magician, I become the king or queen, I become the lover, and then beyond those things, as I harmonize these aspects of my own psyche, I become something even more. I become the beauty that I seek in the world. And now that I have become the beauty I seek in the world, now I seek only to cultivate the expression of my planetary self. Venus, Jupiter, Mars, Saturn, I'm not going to go into details of those endless collective maps around these archetypes, but they represent the entire construct of our society. Mercury is Thoth, is everything technology, computer, internet, communications. Venus is everything social, artistic, creative, and so on and thus forth. If you're very unfamiliar with that, I suggest tuning into The Astrologer with Bill Duvendak and, listening to some of the older discussions and some of the other ideas where we explore the meaning not only of the astrological impacts on our planet, but what these archetypes mean and where they come from. And also check through some of the other pieces. But we can only truly cultivate or build relationships with those when we have fully actualized these other components of ourselves and we're no longer at the subjugation of it. So the pathway to becoming God, or God-like, or hybrid God, which is our own expression of this eternal creative energy, is a deeply personal and individual one. It's not the way the Hollywood films describe. Yet, according to quantum mechanics and the probabilities of the discussions of the collective unconsciousness, nothing says that that's not a possibility. But the pathway to it is important to recognize as a long and slow journey of progression. And if you're honestly at a place where you're needing that, then you have failed in the subjugation or the mastery of the very first archetypes. Because even those planetary archetypes are where we get our fundamental human needs from. We can very easily understand how the very need to be significant is in many ways Jupiter or the sun in many references. How our need to connect is very much in some correlations Venus. Our need for certainty, our need for uncertainty, all these, beautiful concepts are very deeply embedded inside of the planetary archetypes. And the process of active imagination, the process of ceremonial magic is the way in which we work, communicate, get in touch with, but it's also not the only way. You see, because so many of us have worked through history to develop a relationship with these archetypes, the internet's filled with podcasts, episodes, talks, courses that have certain aspects of those, that you can now engage in order to start cultivating those dimensions of yourself to become a more whole being. But the doorway is within you. And it requires you to do something as simple as closing your eyes, imagining some dimension of yourself, because imagination is the key that represents this part, and then to begin communicating with it. Now, this doesn't mean you blindly follow everything you get from it. Again, as I mentioned, both these archetypes have positive and negative polarity. Some of them need to be matured, some of them need to be challenged. You need to apply critical thinking around this. And this is why healing work and shadow work is so important. And that's the only place. And that's why we say that the spirits will test you. You must be willing, however, to overcome those tests because you're clear on the thing that's going to guide you through that entire process. Your unique purpose. What is the purpose of all these dimensions of yourself, and how do they come about? Why do you want to have the power? Why do you want to have the freedom? Why do you want to have the love? What is it you're after? And who does that say you are? And begin today by affirming that as you. You see, if you're out there and you're going, oh, I want this because when I have that, I'll be respected. When I have that, then I'll be this. If you begin instead by telling yourself you're respected, I'm respected, I am loved. And maybe you don't have references from other people doing that, and you can say, I'm loved because I believe in myself. I'm respected because I respect the effort that I have put into efforts. So, unlike all those, self-help hypnosis gurus that are all just like, speak positive to yourself, I want to say that the secret key, the secret formula for self-transformation is to speak into being what you wish to bring into being, and then to support that with a reason. We've seen this in Influence and Persuasion. In Cialdini's book Influence, he reflects the idea of whenever somebody tries to skip a cue, if all they gave was a reason, the other individuals were more inclined. Your brain's the same. We all operate the same. If I say to my brain, I'm a wonderful person, it goes, sure, but you've also got a lot of references where you aren't. If I go to my brain and say, I'm a wonderful person because a part of me is capable of love, suddenly that's more grounded. Suddenly your psyche is more able to accept it. So I want to give you one of my basic instructions, because I can't take you through the journey, at least not in this. If you maybe go through the course, I can begin you on that journey, and I can give you signposts and ideas and pathways and what might lead you there ultimately for yourself. But I want you to start with this basic principle, and I've shared this before in a chat with Bill. Give me 50 reasons why I should give a damn. Look at the things that you really want in your life. And I want you to begin to defining yourself as that. So instead of going, oh, I want money or I want sex, what is it? Who do you need to be in order to have more money, more sex, more love, more whatever? I'm a desirable human being. I bring value to the world. Begin with that. And then as you begin with that, add more reasons. Think about your past. And these can be real or imagined. Remember, your brain doesn't know the difference. Why in the past? Why, I'm a worthwhile human being because I've done this thing. I cared about these people here. I've always come up with these interesting, funny jokes. Whatever it is. Maybe it's more. I'm in technology. I'm in, healthcare. I'm in whatever. It's. Are you acknowledging your beauty? Are you looking at your past and using that as a reference to enforce your empowering beliefs or destroy them? You see, the reason I give you this exercise in conjunction with this conversation is for a very obvious reason. The moment you begin the journey, the guides appear. You see, the moment you begin this journey, you're going to find out where you're underdeveloped, which archetypes you don't have cultivated. And that's what you then bring into your meditation to begin a communication and a relationship with. That's what you then go out and study and explore and grow in order to find yourself reaching the next level. We are hybrid gods. That doesn't mean we have to be the same as the ones that came before us. The world does not need another Jesus, another Buddha, another Muhammad, another any of, fill in the blank. The world needs another you. The instruction to become divine is to become the absolute and complete expression of your true being in its full. That requires you to completely accept yourself, completely love yourself. And you cannot do that just by default, because the second you start looking for reasons, you're going to also have to start admitting the judgments. And you're either going to have to discover information and grow and learn, or you're going to have to let go and heal. Either way, this is a process. It is the ultimate work, also known as the great work. It is the alchemical process by which you systemically liberate your consciousness from its current confines, unite with the archetypes within you, transmute and mature the archetypes in your relationship with them, and ascend systemically up through the elemental dimensions, through the planetary and higher. And as you do this, you begin to understand the principles of magic as real. Because it's not one quick spell that suddenly made things work. It's you changed. And by you changed, the law of entanglement and quantum mechanics kicked in. Your cells, your vibration, your frequency, your energy shifted. And the moment your energy shifted, it became reflected. You could open up to that energy in the world. And suddenly it can open and enter into your life. Up until then, it can't. So the key to mastery, the key to finding what you want, has got nothing to do with a quick fix spell, but genuine, deep self-work and self-transmutation. Because within yourself is the gods. Within yourself is all the power. And let me close off by saying that one thing. How can you be insecure? How can you doubt yourself when all of that is inside of you? When the entire tree of life and death exists within you right now. When the gods, the goddesses, all these potentials of the creative unconscious is within us now. And you have access to that, and all you have to do is begin playing around with your imagination in a controlled space. Discover and be sensitive to the communication your body and your feelings and your emotions are giving you, and work through those things. So you can finally begin the single most important romantic or spiritual relationship you will ever have. And that is the one with yourself. Because trust me, every other relationship is simply an outpouring of that one.